All right. So today I want to talk about the life of Joseph Smith. And I want to, before I start, this is hard for me because I'm emotionally invested in the topic. This is where I came from. So I've taught lots of religious classes here about other religious traditions, and I feel like they've been very constructive because we've learned to appreciate other people's beliefs. When we come to this one, I tend to react because it's my religious belief that I used to have and don't anymore. But I want to do my very best to not turn this into a complaint about Mormonism fest. I want to hopefully create some understanding and discussion and stuff. So this is kind of my mantra when it comes to cross comparative religious tradition or discussion. It's by the Dalai Lama, and I love it. It says, "In my long years as a refugee, I have been fortunate to meet many other Buddhists. This has helped me greatly improve my understanding of their traditions while deepening my appreciation of other religious faiths too. And I found that extending our understanding of each other's spiritual practices and tradition can be an enriching experience because to do so increases our opportunities for mutual respect. Often we encounter things in another tradition that helps us better appreciate something in our own." So that's what I always want to accomplish, and I don't always succeed. I got on a few of my pet topics I was listening to last week. I got on some of my pet topics last week. I'll probably do it this week. That's just the reality. But I want people to leave here understanding Mormonism better, not just having a bunch of excuses not to be Mormon. I don't think anyone here needs that. Right? I mean, none of us here are terribly tempted to be Mormons, and I'm not trying to give you arguing points so you can go out and argue with Mormons either. I'm hoping that when you go out and talk to a Mormon after these classes, you'll know what they believe and why they believe it. And you'll be in a better position to interact with them and appreciate that. So I said that last time. I'm going to say it again whenever we start. So I want to review last time. Last time we did the history of the background that formed kind of the context of Joseph Smith's revelations. Some of you weren't here last time. I recorded that lecture. If you want it, I can send you the link. I've got the slides from last week, and I've got the recording of the lecture. So just send me an email, and I'll send you back the links if any of you want it. What we did is we set the stage for Joseph by talking about the Great Awakening, folk magic, treasure digging, seer stones, and all that stuff that was around Joseph Smith when he grew up and became a prophet. We talked about his salvation theology as a mix of universalism and free will Methodism, which again was part of his context. We talked about Hosea Ballou, who was the pastor. So many of you Universalists will know Hosea Ballou, but he was also the pastor in Vermont when Joseph Smith Sr. was in Vermont, and Joseph Smith Sr., the prophet's father. So Joseph Smith Jr. is the person who's the prophet of Mormonism. Joseph Smith Sr. is his father. Joseph Smith Sr. was a Universalist in Vermont in Hosea Ballou's congregation. And you can see some of Hosea Ballou's teachings, I believe, filtering down into Mormonism through Joseph Smith Sr. We talked about Freemasonry and the legends around it, around Joseph, that were related to Freemasonry, such as the lost word, that it would be restored by a gold plate with a translation keystone that would help you translate them, which I think formed the basis of the golden plate story Joseph later tells. And there was also anti-Masonry, became one of the large religious, one of the largest political parties in the United States, was the anti-Masonry party. There was an anti-Masonic fervor right at this time because of the murder of William Morgan, presumably at the hands of Masons for writing an expose of Freemasonry. And that created all sorts of anti-Masonic sentiment. And again, if you read the Book of Mormon, it's filled with discussions of secret combinations, secret handshakes, people who were conspiring to be thieves and not telling on each other because of these oaths that they had taken. And again, that's the anti-Masonry rhetoric of Joseph's day. The anti-Masonry rhetoric dies down, and by 1840s, Joseph Smith will join the Masons himself. And then he marries William Morgan's widow as one of his plural wives. One of the most bizarre twists in history ever. And then he's murdered by a bunch of Masons, so it gets better.
When you say he married one of them, I mean, he married a lot of people, right?
He did marry a lot of people. That lowers the probability, right?
That's the most special thing to say he married one.
But to marry this particular lady who started the entire, whose husband started the entire anti-Masonry movement, just before he himself was murdered, presumably by some Masons, creates a certain amount of irony in the whole deal. And then there was all this speculation around him that the American Indians were the lost tribes. And all of this stuff together you can see in the context of the Book of Mormon, including discussions of universalism, there's a universalist sect in the Book of Mormon. There's discussions of why that sect is wrong, which is Joseph's kind of straw man attempt to talk about why he believes universalism is wrong. And so all of that stuff is in there, and it comes from this cultural background. There's also a strong cultural background of American exceptionalism, and all of that will make it into the Book of Mormon and Joseph's later theology, which we'll describe later. So today, so this is the outline, background and influences we finished. Then we did the history, and then we want to do the beliefs and the rituals. So this is the outline of what we want to do. We did this. I got through this up to the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. So Joseph Smith had, from last time, Joseph got the plates, he translated them, he published the Book of Mormon, and we quit. Well, we went through the content of the Book of Mormon, and then we quit. So you've all had a quick crash course in the Book of Mormon, its coming forth, and its content, and then we're out of time. So now what I want to do is get us through Joseph's death today. So I want to tell the rest of the story of Mormonism. My guess is that's as far as I'll get. just looking at the stuff I have to cover, if I can get Joseph Smith dead by the end of today, I'll be happy. That would leave us one more class on Mormonism, which we can do in December. So the third Friday of December is the 18th, I believe, and it's a week before Christmas. So how many of you can't come because you'll be gone on vacation? Okay. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. So, like I said, it's a week before Christmas, so I think we can actually have a class, if that's all right, and we'll finish Mormonism. So I think I can do kind of the beliefs and the rituals and practices of Mormonism in a third class. So there'll be 3 classes, one on Joseph and the Book of Mormon, one on the rest of the church's history up to the death of Joseph, and then it gets less interesting, so the rest of it isn't so interesting. And then practices and teachings, which kind of gives you the modern church. And when I do practice and teachings, it's going to be divided in half. It's what Joseph actually taught, and it's what the church actually does today. And they're very different beasts. And so they're worth separating out. And then we'll talk about temple ritual, because in most of this class, we've talked about kind of the rituals people perform in temples. Buddhist temples, Hindu temples, Egyptian temples, Mesopotamian temples. And Mormonism is interesting in that it's one of those temple building traditions. So when we do the history of the church, you'll see the building of the different temples and some of how that played into the church's history. But then we'll go through the rituals performed there, which is part of even modern Mormon life in a fairly profound way. Okay, so I did this last time, but I've got to repeat. Mormonism is the most interesting religious subject you will ever study. The reason I believe that is because it's like going back in time and studying Christianity a few hundred years after Christ was born, when people were still saying, my grandmother knew Christ. And it would be even better because you've got affidavits and court transcripts and newspapers and journals. Because Joseph told people to write in journals. That was one of his teachings. So they all did. And we've got these journals telling you what Joseph did on a day-to-day basis and how they felt when they talked to him and why they believed him when he said different things and the miracles they claimed they saw him do. And so we've got all this textual content that most religious traditions would die for. And if you want to know what it is probably like when Muhammad stepped onto the stage as a prophet, or when Jesus did, and why people followed him and what the followers thought, this gives you this great case study in our day that is remarkable. And so whether you're a believer or non-believer, people often ask me, why are you so obsessed with Mormonism? I'm obsessed with Mormonism because all my friends and family are Mormon, because I used to be Mormon. But I think even if I wasn't, this is a subject we should be obsessed about. And this is interesting stuff. So I hope you find it as interesting as I do. Okay. So this is what, I told you what we did, but if you remember, Joseph is born a callbearer. That means he has the placenta over his face. That means his father wanted to make a seer out of him, thought that was a sign that he would be a seer. So his father was involved in seer stone use and treasure digging. We talked about that. We talked about his first vision. We talked about Moroni's visit and the Book of Mormon translation and then the Book of Mormon published. And as I told that story, I just kind of told it the way Joseph did. I made some commentary, but no one knows what really happened, right? And so I'm just telling you the story. I'm telling you, when I talk about visions and stuff, I'm telling you the story Joseph told, just as he told it. because it's hard to tell what really happened. Did he see something and think he saw a real vision, or was he making stuff up? And no one knows, and so I'm not going to try to do that. I'll just tell you the story.
Was he a consistent narrator over his lifetime?
No.
I don't expect that.
Well, yeah, so the question was he a consistent narrator over his life? And the answer is no, and that was the one thing I did. I told the story as he did, but I also backed up and kind of told the rest of the story that comes from kind of the non-official accounts that are also part of our history, Mormon's history. And I did that because Joseph's story changed, and it's worth pointing out. So when it comes to the first vision, for example, if I tell you a story about something that happened to me, I'll probably tell it different ways every time. I mean, I expect that. There's times when he gets the date different. He says it happened when he was this old or this old, and people point at that and say, see, and I'm like, I've got stories I tell, and how old I am jumps around because I don't remember exactly, right? So I think we ought to cut the variable narrative aspect some slack, except when the narrative begins to shift with theological understanding. So there's aspects of the first vision, for example, where he starts out saying he saw angels, then he says he saw God. Later he abandons the Trinity and believes God and Christ are separate beings, but both divine beings, but separate. And then suddenly he starts talking about seeing two personages in his first vision, which is now the famous painting, and we all see it painted that way, and we forget the earlier accounts don't say that. And of course, then you can apologize for that and say, he did see angels, and then he saw God, and then he saw Christ, and so he's telling different pieces of the story. But when it follows your theology, if that was true, it seems like his theology would have been separate beings from the beginning, and the way his theology morphs through time, and then his story morphs to match it, is suspect in my mind. So he's not always consistent in his narrative now, and that creates some problems, I think, for the story. So after the Book of Mormon is published, we get to this moment. And this is one of those changing narrative moments. Joseph has a scribe. His name is Oliver Cowdery. Oliver helped him translate the entire kind of second bit of the Book of Mormon, minus the 116 lost pages. That was Martin Harris. Oliver Cowdery is one of three witnesses who testified that not only did they see the plates, they saw the angel, and they saw a vision, and the angel told them that it was translated correctly. So they saw the plates, the vision, and an instruction from God that the plates were that it was translated correctly and that the Book of Mormon was true. And all three of these people go to their deathbed testifying that they knew the Book of Mormon was true because they saw it, handled it, touched it, saw the angel, heard a vision. Oliver is one of these. And when Joseph, after the Book of Mormon is published, this is my kind of facsimile of the first edition of the Book of Mormon. So this is the way Grandin published it. After it was published, they started to think about forming a church. And now here comes the difficulty again. I don't know what really happened, but the later correlated story goes that they were translating the Book of Mormon, and in the midst of translation, before it was even published, they came to a section where people were getting baptized. And they said, we need to get baptized. And then it says, that authority is needed to baptize. And they're like, well, where are we going to get this authority bit? So they go off into the woods to pray. And I hope you recognize the compelling nature of this particular story. I remember there was a Catholic priest once who said, Protestants are messed up. And this is the Catholic view, right? These Protestants are messed up. If we are right, we cast them off a long time ago, and they're lost. If they're right that we were wrong, we had no authority to pass to them because we were wrong. And they're wrong. Therefore, the only ones that make any sense are the Mormons. Because at least the Mormons admit that there was some sort of authority. It was lost and they got it back. So here's the way the story goes. And it's a very logically compelling story if you believe in this whole chain of authority bit. Joseph and Oliver, so there's a witness, go out and pray. And an angel comes down from heaven, says, I am John the Baptist. I've been resurrected. He lays his hands on their head and he ordains them to the priesthood of Aaron, which he says contains the authority to run the temporal affairs of the church and to baptize and bless the sacrament. And he goes back up into heaven. And he puts his hand on their head. And I'm giving you this authority of Aaron. The Aaronic priesthood, this is the priesthood that the Levites and the priests in the Temple of Solomon would have held. And specifically the high priest being Aaron, and Aaron's heir is ordained as the high priest, meaning the presiding priest of the Aaronic priesthood. And that was the position which, so the argument goes, Herod and some of these early Jewish apostasies had created a situation where the high priest was chosen politically, and that was incorrect. The true descendant of Aaron, the high priest, would have been John the Baptist, so the story goes. So he was the presiding Aaronic priest when the Aaronic priesthood was lost, and so he comes and gives it back to Joseph and Oliver, and they go and baptize each other. At some later point, they claim that the power to seal up to eternal life and the power the priesthood that contains within it the power to seal up to eternal life and the power to ordain and give the Holy Ghost is a greater priesthood authority, so they claim. And that comes from what they call the Melchizedek priesthood, borrowing from Hebrews chapter 7, I believe. So borrowing from Hebrews, they assume a Melchizedek priesthood. Now, Hebrews was about how Jesus Christ acted as a priest, was a higher priest than the Aaronic priesthood of the Jews around him because he wasn't a descendant of Levi. But his sacrifice and death were a form of atonement, an act of priesthood authority. And it justified that by claiming he had a better priesthood and offered a better sacrifice, his own flesh instead of the flesh of animals and beasts, etc. So the word better plays out largely in Hebrews. That's what Hebrews is about. Borrowing that idea, they assume there's a higher priesthood. Not just one that Jesus held, but one that people leading the church are supposed to hold. And so they claim that 3 people, can you guess who? You just kind of, if you were going to make this up, who would you have? This is Peter, James, and John. Right, so these are the apostles of the Lord Jesus. They come and they give him the Melchizedek priesthood, and then they go up to heaven. Again, it's Joseph and Oliver who were there at this vision. Part of the problem with this story is that at least the later Melchizedek priesthood story doesn't show up until later when he's in Kirtland, so we have no early accounts of it, none. Presumably this is the priesthood by which he's leading the church when the church is first formed, and we have no record of its being restored. And they know that, and so there's all sorts of times where they talk about, you should write in your journal. Notice that when they didn't write in their journal, we lost the entire account of the giving of the priesthood. So years later they talk about this. But they talk about it in a really convenient time when people are challenging Joseph's authority to lead the church, and he claims a hierarchical authority line back from Jesus to Peter, James, and John, to him and Oliver, to the 12 apostles that they then ordain, who then have the power to lead the church. And he claims that authority, without it, you can't lead the church. And he uses that to counter a challenge to his authority to lead the church. And so there's some speculation that this is a late invention, but we don't know. He could have talked about it and no one just wrote about it. So I think that's sort of speculative. But there's at least a debate that rages about whether this is a late story or an early story. But sometime, presumably after this happened, assuming it did, Joseph formed the church. So they call this the restoration of the church, because they believe this is the restoration of Christ's church. But the Church of Jesus Christ, the Church of Christ, I think it was first called, was formed on April 6th, 1830, in this farmhouse in upstate New York. And that's Heidi standing in front of our mouse. And there were a lot of people in attendance, but 6 people signed the rolls because apparently it took 6 people. By the laws, you would incorporate a new church entity by the laws of New York if 6 people. So 6 people formally signed the books, and then many were baptized after. But they baptized people, they blessed the sacrament, passed it, and Joseph was ordained the first elder and Oliver Cowdery the second elder, and those 2 people were then kind of a presidency who led the church. So the church was originally led in this way, and then the priesthood will evolve into prophets and counselors and apostles later. But from the very beginning, they talk about restoring the apostles. So these people were going to pick the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, Oliver and Martin Harris, David Whitmer, were supposed to find, pick, and set apart 12 apostles to follow in Christ's footsteps. So then there would be a first presidency and 12 apostles. So the way the church is led evolves over time, but there seems to be some concept of where it was headed. But again, this is part of what draws people to the idea, and that is that God built up his church's organization line upon line, precept upon precept, through revelation, adding a little bit more information about how it should be until the final structure. That way, there's a feeling that it can continue to evolve as new revelations are given, new instructions are given. You can continue to add structure to this organization because it's malleable, and it's supposed to be in the beginning. So that's the formation of the church. Now, after the church is formed, there's a certain amount of persecution that goes on. We talked about the persecution with the Book of Mormon, and that was mostly from Joseph's associates in treasure digging. He had made a pact with them that if he found a treasure, he would share it with them. Now he found some golden plates, supposedly, and wasn't sharing. And they were fairly unhappy about that. And then later, he says the angel took the plates up to heaven, and they were really unhappy about that. And they kept digging up his floorboards, looking for where he was hiding the plates. And Joseph was hiding something, because you remember, there were people who felt the plates through a pillowcase, so he had some sort of prop. He either really had gold plates, or he had some sort of prop that he was using that people would touch and feel and things to prove to people that they were real. He had them sitting on, and in fact, his wife says they were sitting on the mantle, and she would pick them up and carry them and put them somewhere else so she could dust. And she says, I never saw them, but I could feel the weight through the pillowcase that he was keeping them in. So he had something, and the treasure diggers were desperate to find it, whatever it was, because if it wasn't real gold plates, that would prove him as a fraud. If it was real gold plates, they're rich. So that was a lot of the persecution. After the church is formed, I think the persecution shifts a little bit. There's a kind of a Christian fundamentalist idea that you're creating new scripture. This is a fundamental doctrine of Mormonism. Just like the church can evolve in time, the Bible is not fixed. The words of the Bible are special, not because it's the Bible, but because it was written by prophets. So if you have a prophet, what he writes is scripture. Not only is the Book of Mormon ancient scripture, but Joseph is writing scripture. Not only writing the Book of Mormon, but writing his own revelations and claiming the same authority as Peter, James, and John. He's their successor. His words are just as important as their letters in the Bible. And he's writing these revelations. And so there was a certain fundamentalist backlash against that. Christians didn't like that idea. And I think for good reason, right? If you can, it makes sense, though. I mean, there's no reason that if an ancient person can write in that scripture, so can a modern person. I mean, that's just obvious. The problem is if you accept that idea, anarchy reigns. Because now people can write anything they want and claim to be a prophet, which is what's happening. And there's no way to secure orthodoxy. So this was a threat. So there was a lot of persecution, and for a lot of reasons. But for whatever reason, persecution got bad in New York. Joseph immediately sends out missionaries. One of them takes one of the first copies of the Book of Mormon. Now, one of the first missionaries was Joseph Smith's brother, Samuel. He takes one of the first copies of the Book of Mormon, and he passes it out. He goes off without postscript, and I think his mission is short, as I remember. But he goes, across the way and passes out a few Book of Mormon and comes home. One of the Book of Mormons, and this is how I understand the story. I may get this wrong. So my understanding is that one of the Book of Mormons, Samuel passed out on the very first mission of the Mormon mission, got passed from person to person until it got passed to Brigham Young. And Brigham Young was converted by the first missionary ever sent, in a chain, from the first missionary that was ever sent out. And he's one of the early converts, and he'll become the second leader of the Mormon Church. And another missionary stumbles upon a guy in Kirtland, Ohio. His name is Sidney Rigdon. Let me do this in a different order. This is Sidney Rigdon. Sidney Rigdon is one of these restorationist guys in the middle of the Awakening who had an entire congregation of people. And what he taught was that the true gospel of Christ was lost. That somehow it would have to be restored again someday. And he's baptized so quickly after the Book of Mormon is formed by one of the first missionaries that it's created all sorts of conspiracy theorists that he's actually behind the writing of the Book of Mormon. He wrote it with Joseph as a Ponzi, anticipating this whole thing that was coming. I'm not particularly fond of that theory. I think it's a conspiracy theory that makes about as much sense as aliens building the pyramids. But whatever happens, he's converted almost immediately. But he's a pastor, and he has a congregation. And his entire congregation is converted with him because his doctrine is so similar to Joseph's, thus the conspiracy theory, that when Joseph shows up, they're like, yep, this is what we've been waiting for. Hallelujah, and the whole thing joins. So when the persecution becomes bad in New York, Joseph gets a revelation in what's called the Doctrine and Covenants. This is Joseph's collection of revelations. Later it would become. But Joseph gets a revelation to go to Ohio. And he says, wherefore for this cause I give unto you the command that you should go to the Ohio, For there I will give unto you my law, and there you shall be endowed with power from on high. This is a biblical reference, and it's very powerful. So I don't know if I can adequately express the hooks in the biblical theology that Joseph spins very, very powerfully and accurately. What's happening here is if you remember the Israelites, they wander in the wilderness, and they go to Sinai. And in Mount Sinai, they're given the law. The law of Moses and instructions for building a temple where they are endowed with power from on high. There they build the Ark of the Covenant, among other things. Then they cross into the Promised Land. Now, that's not the Promised Land, right? That's Mount Sinai. But then they cross into the Promised Land, taking the law that they've been given before them, as illustrated by the Ark that has the law in it, and it parts the River Jordan and makes clear their way into the Promised Land. And then they circle Jericho 7 times, and the walls fall down, carrying the ark and blaring the trumpets. Remember the story. That creates a mythical interpretation of that historical event, presumably historical event. That what God is really teaching us is that we go to the temple, there we gain the law and the teachings of God, and those laws become keys to open our way to the Promised Land, in this case, heaven. So Joseph is taking them from New York, it's kind of like Egypt, to Kirtland, Ohio, where he promises he's going to give them the law. And then they're going to build Zion. Zion will not be in Ohio. From the very beginning, Joseph is clear. Ohio is not Zion. But Ohio is where we're going to go to get the law. Then we're going to go to build Zion. Apologize for my cough. I've had it for about 4 months, and it just won't go away. So here's the revelation. Go to Ohio, and I will give you my law, and I will endow it with power from on high. So they get to Ohio. So here's kind of Mormon migration. Palmyra, New York, Kirtland, Ohio. And then later we'll go Missouri, Nauvoo, and we'll work our way around. And in each of these migrations, they're kind of kicked out by persecution. And so this creates, in Mormons today, a very strong persecution complex. We've been persecuted all throughout our history, and so we're persecuted people, and we came here to be left alone. Why don't people leave us alone to practice our own thing? And you'll see it in the debates, over gay marriage and stuff. I'll engage with somebody in a debate on gay marriage, and they'll say, "Why don't you people just leave us alone? Let us build Zion in our own land." And right, and it comes from this persecution complex, and it starts right here. We leave Ohio, we leave New York because of persecutions, and we go to Ohio. And the revelation itself will say, because of the designs of our enemies that are presuming upon us, we need to escape. Otherwise, they will kill us. And there is some evidence that there's some threats on people's lives. It's that bad. And they go to Ohio, and of course, Sidney Rigdon is in Ohio with an entire congregation for them. So they meet up with Sidney Rigdon. When they meet up with his congregation, and there they start building. Now, one thing about the Mormons, they're really good at organizing, building, making societies, and working hard. They're just known for hard work. And they get to Kirtland, and they build all sorts of buildings. This is Newell K. Whitney's store. They didn't build this. He was already there. But let me see if I can get this story right. Newell K. Whitney is praying because he's been converted and he's waiting for Joseph to come. And he's praying and saying, "Please send Joseph to me." And then he gets up off of praying and he goes downstairs, and a carriage pulls up, and Joseph jumps out and runs up to him and shakes his hand and says, "You prayed me here. What do you want of me? I am Joseph the prophet." So, yeah, go ahead.
How many people did they follow?
I don't know the church's size at this point. It starts with 8 on April 6th, 1830, and then by the next day there's 30, 40, and something, and then by this point I think we're getting into the thousands, but I don't know. It grows incredibly fast, which is part of what freaks people out. Mm-hmm. Because Joseph is busy doing miracles. I mean, he gets to here, and he heals the widow Johnson's arm that's withered. In the middle, in front of a bunch of people. So this story goes, he's in a congregation full of people, and the pastor is saying, what could possibly heal? The power of God is gone from the earth, never to return. The apostles healed, but here's a woman whose arm is withered. Will there ever be someone on the earth who can do what they did again until Christ returns? And Joseph gets sick of listening to the sermon. He walks up, he puts his hand on her head and commands her to be whole, and walks out. And she stands up and says, "I'm whole." And then her whole family joins the church. So, this guy was charismatic, and people didn't believe him just because they were idiots. I mean, he was convincing. So this is the upper room of Newell K. Whitney's store. Joseph makes him. This is the guy who says, "You prayed me here. What do you want of me?" He makes him the bishop of the first congregation, in his upper room, this is this is where Joseph has what's called the School of the Prophets, where he will invite all the kind of leadership of the church and people who are kind of selected for maybe becoming leadership in, and they would pray, they would give revelations. Joseph would receive most of his theology revelations, D&C 76, which is a revelation about the afterlife and salvation and what it's like and the degrees of glory, which we'll cover later, was given in this room to him and Sidney Rigdon, actually. Sidney Rigdon receives the revelation. There's another one of those fun stories where Joseph would look up and say, "I see," and he would describe what he would see. And now it's written, "we saw" is how the revelation is written today. But when it was being given, Joseph would say, "and I see," and he would just kind of describe it. And later they chose words to describe more carefully. But when it was happening, they would just say, "I see," and then Rigdon would say, "I see the same." And then Joseph would say, "I see," and Rigdon would say, "I see the same." And then Rigdon would say, "Well, now I see," and then Joseph would say, I see the same." And then they would go back and forth like this. And when it was all over, Joseph jumped up and down, and he was excited. He says, "Isn't this wonderful?" And Sidney Rigdon, the description is he's lying in the chair, pale and sweating. And Joseph looks at him and says, "Brother Rigdon isn't as used to this as I am." And and that became D&C 76, one of the most famous chapters in all of Mormon scripture, that gives kind of what Mormons would call the plan of salvation later. In Ohio, Joseph receives a revelation called D&C 42, which is known as the law. And so it does what sort of thing you would expect. It's kind of like the first handbook of church instruction. It says, this is the requirements before you baptize somebody. This is the way you should run the church. This is if someone commits adultery, you should be serious and you should hold a court. But if they do it, you should forgive them. But if they do it again, you should excommunicate them. And it's got this list of instructions for running a church. So it's perfect. You go to Ohio and you get the law. But there was one other thing that they were supposed to do. He said that he would endow them with power from on high. So one of the revelations given is that they need to build a temple. So organize yourselves, prepare every needful thing, and establish a house, even a house of prayer, a house of fasting, a house of faith, a house of learning, a house of glory, a house of order, even a house of God. And so people were used to building churches, but Joseph Smith had a very Old Testament sort of approach to this, and he said, we don't just want a church, we want a temple. And they were kind of like, well, where's the temples in the New Testament? And Joseph had these upper rooms, right? Where you remember Jesus has these upper room moments, where the 40 during the 40 days he'll meet with the apostles in the upper room, and they'll feel the wounds in his hands and feet. And Joseph describes those as impromptu temples because no proper house had been built, and the Christians never got a chance to build a proper house before the Christians were persecuted until they lost the truth and became apostate. So the Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans because of apostasy. The Christians never got a chance to build a temple, but they had temples and temple rituals that they would use in these impromptu upper rooms. So thus the upper room of Newell K. Whitney's store becomes the School of the Prophets.
Is that why it's sometimes called the upper room?
Yes. And this is why we get the School of the Prophets in Newell K. Whitney's upper room, and this is why Joseph says, but the School of the Prophets belongs in the temple. It doesn't belong in this store. This is a temporary location. It belongs in the temple. We need to build a temple to house the School of the Prophets and to be, quote, endowed with power from on high. He never explains what that is at first, but the saints say, okay. And by the Mormonism, the saints are the members, right? The Church of Jesus Christ, the Latter-day Saints. The saints aren't, we are supposed to all be saints, and so the saints are the people. That's us. We are the saints, and we're going to build Zion. And to do that, so Zion is this concept. From the very beginning, Joseph is utopian. He's not just going to be a prophet and teach religion. He's going to build a utopian society led by a theocracy. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So led by a theocracy with rules governed by a church and with people willing to sacrifice to bring Zion. And it will consist of a law given by revelation and a temple where people are given ordinances, and the entire society will revolve around that temple as its central key point. And so Joseph says, we're going to build this temple, and it's part of building Zion. And Kirtland, Ohio is the law point, Zion is going to come later, and he'll talk about that. But so Kirtland was kind of always his stepping stone, and this is the building they built. It's insane. So, you go there and it's not, I guess, too impressive today. But if you think about what they had to build with, these people were migrants, had just been refugees, just been kicked out of New York. They were dirt poor, and they spent most of their money to build this building. And it's a fairly impressive, beautiful building. And there's all sorts of stories that revolve around it, including the architect. When Joseph sent the architect off to learn, and he came back, and he had this vision where he saw the building, and he came over him like a 3D hologram, and he knew what it was supposed to look like. And so there's all sorts of great stories around this building. I wish I should have included some pictures of the inside, but there's pulpits on one side and pulpits on the other, much like a Masonic hall set up. In the middle, you can drop curtains to section it off. And there's a lower story and an upper story where you can hold different meetings. So it's nothing quite like a modern Mormon temple. And the modern Mormon temple ordinances weren't performed here until much later. The ordinances that were performed here, we'll talk about Mormon ritual later, but they included things like washing of feet, the school of the prophets, and this sort of thing.
See a little hot water.
It might. I'm coughing so badly. I apologize for this.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Didn't bring you much in case you don't want.
Okay. So this is the building of the temple. He builds the temple, and then this is one of those other important moments. Elijah and a list of other people came. And by the way, if we do kind of the math, it looks like he came on Passover. So there's no mention by Mormons of this fact. You'd think if Joseph had planned it, he would have mentioned it. So maybe it's just one of those lucky coincidences. But Jews all around the world opened their door on Passover for Elijah with the promise that Elijah would come back. And while that was happening, Joseph claims he's in the temple, again with Oliver Cowdery, and Elijah comes, including a list of other people. Moses and Elijah came, and each one of them gave different keys. So the Mormon conception of priesthood, I wish I had a key ring, I guess I do over here. But Mormon conception of priesthood is it's a key ring. There's two key rings. There's the Aaronic priesthood and there's the Melchizedek priesthood. Those are the key rings. But then what you do with it is you put keys on the key ring, and each key kind of opens a different door. So the priesthood by itself doesn't authorize you to do some things without a presiding authority that kind of turns the key and authorizes the work. So if I held the Melchizedek priesthood, like I used to, and I wanted to, the Melchizedek priesthood authorizes me, among other things, to give the gift of the Holy Ghost. And I could baptize because I also held the Aaronic priesthood. So if I found a random person, I couldn't just baptize them and ordain them, because what I didn't hold is the key to preside over those ordinances and authorize their use. And so what Elijah brought back was the keys authorizing the ordinances of the temple. The sealing power is what they call it, but it authorizes, among other things, the ordinances of the temple, sealing of parents to children, sealing of spouses to each other in eternal families, which will become part of why Mormons are opposed to gay marriage, which we'll talk about later. When we go through the doctrine, we'll talk about the sealing power, but this is an important historical point because this is the point when the sealing power is restored. So the way this works is they build the temple, they dedicate the temple in a big ritual Hosanna shout. They all shout Hosanna, and they perform a temple dedication, and they pack so many people in there they're worried that the floor is going to sag. So it's a big building, and they packed it. And then the stories that come out of that, they're later, but people tell stories of seeing hosts of angels. Some of them people claim they saw Jesus attending the meeting and appearing in vision over the meeting. And then Joseph lowered the curtains and claimed that he had this bestowal of keys after a few days, I think, after the dedication. So this was kind of this is the high point, and this is the Mount Sinai moment of Mormonism, intentionally so. This is the Mount Sinai moment, and Mormons have huge spiritual experiences during this moment. Not the average member of the church recorded very powerful spiritual experiences. Some more than others, but a lot of people claim to see visions and things. Now, the next thing that happened while they were in Kirtland, Ohio, is this guy. What the heck's his name? I can't remember. If it comes to me, I'll tell you. But he wanders through. Now Egypt mania had struck kind of the entire United States. because the French Revolution had taken off, and there was Napoleon, and he had gone to Egypt and come back with all these treasures, and so all of Europe was afire with Egypt mania, so was the U.S. And Chamberlain, I think was his name. No, that's not right. I can't remember. Anyway, he comes to Kirtland, Ohio with a collection of mummies and some papyrus fragments. And now at this point, no one could really read Egyptian. But Joseph had claimed the Book of Mormon was written in Reformed Egyptian. So this guy shows up and says, and he's trying to make people pay. He's making his living, making people pay a few pennies to see the dead mummies. And people like to see the grisly mummies. And then he would show them these papyrus fragments, and people would be like, ooh, I don't know what that is. I can't read it, but it looks mysterious and special. And somebody piped up when he came to Kirtland, Ohio, well, Joseph can read that. Now, Joseph's in trouble at this point, right? So they bring the papyrus rolls to Joseph. Great, Joseph can read it. Let's see. So they bring the papyrus. Joseph takes a look at it, and he says, this is the record of Joseph when he was in Egypt. And this is the record of Abraham when he was in Egypt. These are scriptures. This is cool stuff. And I'll translate it for you. Give me some time. And the guy said, no, I need to take my mummies and go. And he said, well, then we ought to buy this stuff. And so he put out kind of a call to the membership of the church, and they forked over a bunch of money and paid this guy for his entire mummy collection and his papyrus collection, which they bought. And Joseph then proceeded to translate the text of this one. This was the Book of Abraham. And he tells a story about Abraham bound to an altar about to be sacrificed to some Egyptian pagan gods. But Abraham is saved at the last minute, which, by the way, makes for an incredibly moving story when you realize that later when this is before Abraham sacrifices his own son. So it makes Abraham, what Abraham does to his son, something Abraham himself went through, and adds some poignancy to that particular story. And this becomes known as the Book of Abraham. Then Joseph is killed. I'm going to skip ahead and just kind of tell you the lineage of this particular story. Joseph is killed, but he publishes before his death several installments of the Book of Abraham. He promises more but never finishes. And he never got to the Book of Joseph. And later Brigham Young would make the parts of the Book of Abraham published by Joseph Scripture. I believe Emma, Joseph's wife, kept the mummies after Joseph's death, and she made a living showing them to people in her home, and the papyrus. And later they were sold to a museum. I don't remember how they got to the museum, but they ended up in the Chicago Wood Museum, which burned in the Chicago fire. And it was assumed that all of the papyrus was lost. So what we have in Mormon scriptures are a few pictures. Let's see if I can find these quickly. We have a few pictures from the papyrus and the translation. And Egyptian scholars kind of looked at that and said, that doesn't quite look right, but I can't tell that he's translating it wrong, but it doesn't quite look right. And it created a little bit of stir, but not much, because all we had was a few pictures. There are a few pictures here that actually have text, and that gets a little harder because we can read the text. But for the most part, Mormons could ignore this until someone, and I don't remember who, was digging around in their archives and found some old Egyptian papyrus that no one was paying any attention to, looked at the picture and said, hey, I've seen that picture before. That's in Mormon scripture. And they called the Mormon church and said, you guys want this stuff? We've got this old papyrus that belonged to Joseph Smith. And they said, yes. And so they got it, and then they published it. And then the Egyptologists translated it immediately. And it doesn't look anything like what Joseph said. Not even remotely similar. So that's our Book of Abraham story. This is one of those things that has caused a lot of consternation among Mormons. I know a lot of people left the church over this particular one. My Egyptology professor, the one who taught me to read Egyptian, John Gee, is a believing Mormon who can read the papyrus and admits firsthand that it doesn't say what Joseph said it does, and he's quite happy to still be Mormon. So there's lots of ways around this sort of thing. ranging all the way from there was originally a text of the Book of Abraham, and it's been modified into this Egyptian story. And there's some reasons to there's some similarities, actually. So you could make these kind of vague comparisons and say what Joseph received was the original story, not the later story that we have today. So he was getting revelation about the origins of the story, not the actual text sitting before us. That's one of them. The other way around this is they were just like the stones Joseph used to get revelation. They were catalysts for an actual revelation, but they didn't actually come from the papyrus. The problem with that approach is Joseph says he's translating the papyrus, and so you almost have to say Joseph doesn't know what he himself is doing, which I know many believing Mormons who will make that argument. But again, I got to the point where I could read this stuff. I can't do it anymore. I've forgotten. But there was a moment when I could read this stuff, and I was happy to still be a believing Mormon. I knew full well it didn't say what Joseph said it said. And I still found a way to believe it. And it took quite a bit to actually kick me to the curb, which is one of those psychological things that is interesting to note, right? You can go through a lot and still find a way to believe what you want to believe. So anyway, this is the Book of Abraham. This also happens in Kirtland. And the next thing that happens in Kirtland is the Kirtland Apostasy. And Mormons love this story in the sense that right on the heels of this great spiritual experience, they're getting revelation about Abraham in Egypt, Joseph in Egypt. They're getting revelation on this temple thing. Half of them had seen visions and angels, and then like 80% of them up and leave the church. So what happens in Kirtland? Joseph knew that to build Zion and to really do what he wanted to do and to get the saints to be able to buy land and live, they needed credit. And we understand that credit is kind of the grease that wheels the wheels of society, and there was sort of a credit crunch going on in the nation at this point. And Joseph said, we need, and he's been accused of a get-rich-quick scheme. I don't think that's accurate. I think reading Joseph and reading kind of his own journals and the people around him, he had this feeling that if we're going to build Zion, we need credit. And credit can't be had. The non-Mormons won't do business with us. There's already tensions between the Mormons and their neighbors because the Mormons come in as a block and they kind of build their own little city and kind of they're building a theocracy. And non-Mormons didn't like that. They felt excluded. There are good reasons for the tensions, but for whatever reason, there's tension with their neighbors. The non-Mormons won't do business with them, and they don't have credit, and they can't buy and sell without it, and it's holding back the economy, and it's preventing them from building Zion. And they just spent all this money building this temple thing, and they're poor. And Joseph says, well, what we need is credit. And it's okay because it's circular, right? I loan to you, you loan to you, you loan to me, you loan back to me, and that greases the wheels of commerce. Joseph understood that much economic theory. He was correct. So he started a bank. And then the lawyers kind of came down and said, you can't have a bank without meeting these criteria. You can't meet it. And Joseph said, well, then we'll form an anti-banking society. It's not a bank. It just does everything a bank does, but it's not a bank. And he started issuing notes. And these were promissory notes, right? I will pay you so much money, and you will pay me so much money. And he asked the saints, please invest in the bank. Invest in the bank because we need it to make this Zion, this city we're building function. We have to have this bank. And some non-Mormons actually seem to have intentionally engineered a run on the bank. And it failed. The other reason it failed is there was a recession that hit the entire U.S. at exactly this point in time. And the bank failed. And people lost their entire life savings in the bank that Joseph had encouraged people as leader of the church to invest in. And they felt like he had promised them that if they invested in it, it would work. And Joseph said, well, that's not quite what I said. I just said invest it, and it didn't work. And when you hit people in their pocketbooks, a lot of them will abandon you. And a bunch of people left the church over the failure of the Kirtland Safety Society. And again, this makes for great sermons. You can talk all day about how people are willing to sacrifice for God, but if you then, have a financial setback, people care more about their money than the Lord, and they leave. Right after seeing visions of angels and Jesus Christ, the dedication of the temple, they up and leave. No amount of spiritual experience will save you if you set your heart on your riches. Is the way the sermon usually goes. So this is the Kirtland Apostasy. So now while he's in Kirtland, before the apostasy actually happens, but we usually tell them kind of in this order, Joseph says, we're going to build Zion. Remember, Kirtland is the law. We're getting the law so we can build Zion. Joseph says Zion is not going to be in Kirtland. We need to build it somewhere where we'll be left alone. And he has this concept that if we go to the borders of the Lamanites, is what he calls it. Now, the Lamanites are the American Indians from the Book of Mormon, right? The Book of Mormon says the Lamanites are actually descendants of Israel. They're one of the lost tribes. And before the second coming of Christ, they will rise up in glory and power. And so Joseph has this vision that he's going to go out there and he's going to convert all these Indians to Mormonism by teaching them that they're one of the lost 10 tribes. And he's just going to convert thousands of them. And he also wants a central location for Zion, the center of the United States, and where they can build their Zion. And so he says, on the border of the Lamanites. Now, at this point, this was kind of Louisiana territory, right? And this was the border of civilized life. And they're hanging out here in Ohio. And Joseph says, we're going to go to the borders of the Lamanites. So Joseph goes on a mission. Joseph and several others, to the Lamanites. And they convert like nobody, but they go on a mission to the Lamanites. And they teach them. But while he's there on his mission to the Lamanites, he finds a spot. Independence in Jackson County, Missouri. And he says, this is it. This is where we're going to build Zion. And then he goes back to Kirtland. So Joseph is trying to lead the church from Kirtland, but he's sending people to Missouri to start building Zion. And so these things happen at the same time. When they're busy, trying to build up Zion in Jackson County, Missouri. Now, the thing you have to understand about Joseph, everything goes back to Adam, Abraham, the early patriarchs, the Old Testament, right? And so he announces that Jackson County, Missouri is the place where we're going to build Zion, because that's the place Christ is going to come back to in the second coming. That's where he's going to rule and reign from a temple we're going to build. We just built a temple in Kirtland, but we're going to build the temple in Jackson County, Missouri. Christ will reign from there in the millennium. And this is the spot where the Garden of Eden stood when Adam was here. And now you just kind of went off the rails, right? So this is where Adam and Eve lived, and this is the Garden of Eden. And that's why it's going to be the place where Christ comes back. That's why America is a special place. Remember this American exceptionalism? Because this is the place of the Garden of Eden. This is where it all started. Now, how do you do that? Because the Garden of Eden was in, Israel, right? Supposedly, or at least Mesopotamia. Joseph's theology goes like this. God created the world, put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The continents were together. He's got plate tectonics going on before plate tectonics was a thing. Somehow he noticed that North and South America and Africa fit together. And so the world was all together, and Adam and Eve lived here. Then there was a flood. And during the flood, Noah got on the boat somewhere in the Americas, and the flood took him over to Mount Ararat and plopped him down on top of Mount Ararat in the Old World, what we call the Old World. And then the world was divided. There's this scripture, Peleg. In the days of Peleg, the world was divided. And what that probably actually is a reference to is the division of people into different languages and tribes. But Joseph actually assumes that there was this great earthquake and God separates the continents, right? And it makes sense. I mean, they didn't know as much about geology back then as we do. So now the new world is separated from the old world, and Noah is starting over kind of in the old world, and God is holding this new world, this place that was actually the promised land, the Garden of Eden, in preparation for righteous people who are going to come and then when the Book of Mormon people go there, they're blessed with this great promised land that God gives them as they sail from the old world to the new world and settle it, which is the story of the Book of Mormon. And then after they become wicked and are destroyed, they promise that some Gentiles will flee. This is in the Book of Mormon. Gentiles will flee religious persecution to the promised land, will bring the scriptures to the descendants of the Nephites and the Lamanites, would convert them, and then they would rise up and take their rightful place as one of the tribes of Israel among the Gentiles who would be numbered among them, and they would all sing Kumbaya and build Zion, and then Christ would return. And there's also this beautiful concept that I think is actually nice, that when we build Zion down here, God will build it up there, already has, and then the two will meet in the middle, and that will be the second coming. So the second coming will happen when we build Zion first. We build it and Christ comes to meet it. But he won't come until we build it ourselves. So it's almost like there's this concept of building heaven on earth, which is part of the reason Mormons are big into building nice cities and settling places. And I mean, they're very industrious in that sense because that's part of what they're doing. They're building heaven on earth. That's part of their theology. But the other thing you have to understand about this whole Jackson County, Missouri thing, it doesn't really end up in the Mormon scriptures. It's there if you know, right? So Joseph taught this very openly. The context of the scriptures that in the revelations he receives in Missouri and in Kirtland very clearly tie it to the Garden of Eden. But to find out that Joseph said this is where Adam and Eve actually lived, you kind of have to go to the journals. And so this is one of those things that a lot of Mormons today don't believe. So when I say, don't come here to find out what Mormons believe. You want to know what Mormons believe? Ask a Mormon. But you can come here to find out what Joseph taught. And there's probably a good chance that the Mormon you're talking to won't believe the same thing. So I'm not telling you that Mormons believe that the Garden of Eden was in Jackson County, Missouri. A good chunk of them don't. There are a few who do. Most of them don't even know Joseph ever said that. So you have to understand. You have to, I hope, understand this context before you go talking to your Mormon neighbor and chatting about this. Because, anyway, so this is part of Joseph's modus operandi. Everything goes back to Adam and Eve. Everything goes back to the ancient order, and his job is to restore the ancient order from the missing fragments that he finds. So he unabashedly borrows from things around him, and he tells you that's what he's doing, but then he says, these things are pieces of the lost truth that I'm restoring. And that truth I'm restoring goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. And when he restores the temple, it's going to go all the way back to Adam and Eve. When he restores the book of Abraham, it has a story in it of Adam and Eve. Is when Abraham starts telling the story of Adam and Eve. I mean, Joseph is obsessed with this Adam and Eve story because it's going back to the beginning where everything came from. And we're going to try to go full circle. Adam and Eve were in the presence of God. They fell and were cast out. We're going to build Zion, and then Christ will return and will be brought back into the presence of God and return to Eden. And the whole thing goes full circle. So there's a lot of connections going on here, and a lot of biblical connections, and a lot of theology that's actually fairly satisfying, actually, if you kind of immerse yourself in it. It's a very cohesive and self-consistent story. Okay, this is Jackson County, Missouri today, and it reminds me of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Because we have these Jewish people who believe the millennium won't come until they build the temple in Jerusalem, but they can't build the temple in Jerusalem because the Muslims have a mosque sitting on the top of their Temple Mount. So this is Jackson County, Missouri, what's become of Joseph's Zion promised land. Right here, Joseph laid 4 cornerstones right there for the temple. This is the temple where Christ is going to come and reign. This is the center point of the Garden of Eden, where the tree of life was and all that stuff. So it's right here. You can go there and stand where the tree of life was. Very satisfying thing to do. The church split, right, into what used to be called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, and now it's the Community of Christ, and the LDS Church of Jesus Christ. And the LDS Church has a visitor center here and a stake center here, and they own this plot. The Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ, or Community of Christ, owns this lot, and they happily built their temple. In the wrong place, but there's their temple. So they've got a temple in Jackson County, Missouri. They fulfilled their prophecy. They're all ready for it to go for it, but they're in the wrong place. And the reason they're in the wrong place is because they don't own the right place. And the reason they don't own the right place is because these guys own it. These are the Church of Christ of the Temple Lot. That's actually the name of their church. And they're a splinter group from Joseph Smith. And they splintered from Joseph Smith at just the right time to take the deed of owning the temple with them, and they've not given it up since to anybody.
What are they called again?
The Church of Christ of the Temple Lot, believe it or not. And there's probably 1,000 members total in the entire world. I had the good fortune of having a lengthy debate with one of their apostles. That was really fun. One day when I was there visiting. That was a lot of fun. They're really small. They don't have any money. There's no way they can afford to build the temple. There's no way the LDS Church is going to give them the money to build the temple. because they don't want them building the temple. They want to build the temple. And neither will the community of Christ give them money because they want the temple, and they won't sell it. And they've sued several times. The community of Christ, I think, sued to get the temple lot from them, and the LDS Church stepped in and defended them and paid their bills, or their lawyer fees, to make sure that didn't happen.
And when did this happen?
Oh, I don't know. This is a couple decades ago. This is what's been going on for years since. So the whole thing is tied up in this crazy, and of course there's all these Mormons waiting for it to get untied, because as soon as it does, then we need to get ready, because the second coming is, because this is the sign of the second coming, when we actually build our temple. And the LDS Church finally built a temple in Missouri, but it wasn't even close to this, and they weren't even trying. It was just a temple in Missouri, because they needed a temple in Missouri, and there were enough members, they needed one. But of course, all sorts of Mormons got up and antsy about, we've got a temple in Missouri. It's in the wrong place, but it's a temple in Missouri. So anyway, that was fun to watch. And here's the cornerstones that Joseph laid to tell us where the temple was supposed to sit. And the community, the Church of Christ of the Temple lot has put little cement markers there. So you can go out there on this well-manicured lawn and see the 4 cornerstones where the temple's going to sit. And they don't have any money to build it. So, whatever that's worth.
Now they split when Joseph was still alive?
Yeah.
Okay, so they believed his idea that this is the temple and all that, but then they split away from
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, in fact, they'll claim Joseph is a fallen prophet, and he fell over polygamy. They're one of those people. They're one of the Mormon offshoots who reject polygamy, believe in the Book of Mormon, and think Joseph lost it when he went to Nauvoo and became a polygamist. They're ignoring the fact that there's evidence he was a polygamist in Kirtland. He just wasn't telling anyone. But anyway, that's a whole other story, which is part of the debate I had with this apostle. It was fun. So yeah, they believe in Joseph's revelations. They believe in the Book of Mormon. They just don't believe in some of the later stuff Joseph taught, and their splinter group. And they happen to hold the deed. So what happens now is the Missouri dynamic with Mormon neighbors is really hard to explain. And I don't know how I can do it justice, because there's enough blame to go around. But Mormons wander into Missouri, you can imagine, tell them that this is their Zion, where they're going to build Zion, and you might as well sell all your land to us because we're going to live here. Christ is going to come and reign here, and thousands and thousands of converts, by this point, thousands, start showing up, and they vote as a bloc. They're also opposed to slavery, and Missouri is a slave state, and it's precariously so, because we almost have enough people to make it a non-slave state, and if that happened, that would tilt the entire balance of power in the entire U.S. pre-Civil War tensions. And the Missourians, who are slave owners, don't want that. The Mormons are opposed to slavery. They're quite happy to see that happen, and they're fairly arrogant about it. And the Missourians are violent about it and react with violence, and the Mormons respond with violence. And before we know it, people are burning farms and people are dead, and it very quickly spins out of control. And so at some point, the people in Jackson County, Missouri said, look, you can't stay here. You own a few blocks of land, but we're kicking you out. And they did. They refused to sell them any more land, and there was some other, I don't remember if it was military or violent, but they kicked them out. And they said, well, what we're going to do is, this is Jackson County. You can't stay here, but you can have this other county up here. And so the Mormons all leave Jackson County and head up north. And this is the lost Zion moment, right? Because Jackson County is Zion. Joseph's already told us this. So Joseph starts talking about redeeming Zion. And it's borrowed from the Israelite scriptures, where the Israelites were in exile in Babylon, and they want to go back and redeem Jerusalem. This is the Jerusalem of Mormonism. And they're talking about redeeming Jerusalem from the pagans who have stolen it from us. Illegally, because it was ours. We owned the land, and they kicked us off of our land, and mob violence, you see, again, the persecution complex kicks in. So they move up into these other settlements, and immediately Joseph picks this one and says, Adam-on-Diamond, this is the place, Joseph's got to do this, right, everywhere he settles. This is the place where Adam went after he was kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So this is where he built his altar. Remember, and Cain and Abel had their whole deal with God and altar, and Cain slew Abel. This is that place. This is where Adam got together before he died, and blessed all of his children and prophesied about the coming of Christ, who would come one day and redeem everybody, and then he died and they buried him here. And this is the place where we'll have this great meeting place where just as Adam called together all his posterity, again, Adam will return and call together all his posterity, and then Christ will come, and then we'll go and he'll reign from the temple. But there's this other meeting that's going to happen here first. He's got to justify the places they live. These places are sacred spots. And they're sacred spots because something sacred happened there. So remember when we talked about temple, what makes a spot sacred? How do you take a place and say, this place is sacred, so you can build a temple there? And one of the things you do is you talk about something special happened here in the past. So it's a memorial for the place where the Buddha sat under the Bodhisattva tree or something, right? And that becomes a sacred place. And so this is the spot where Adam dwelt after being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So Joseph names it Adam-ondi Amen, Spring Hill, and this is going to be one of the great meeting places before the second coming. And again, he laid the cornerstones of a temple. He keeps doing this. He succeeded in Kirtland. Everywhere else he goes, he lays the cornerstones of a temple, and they kick him out. But everywhere he goes, he lays cornerstones for a temple. But Joseph is serious about this whole temple business. And by this point, his temple theology is evolving. So once he actually gets one and builds one, poof, comes this huge edifice of ritual that we'll discuss next month, which is the ritual endowment that Mormons still participate in today, that is extraordinarily powerful, moving sort of play that kind of ties all this stuff together. And he wants to convey that to people, but he claims he can't do it without a temple. He claims Kirtland was a preparation. In Kirtland, he got the keys that will authorize the temple, but he didn't actually deliver the ordinances. He still wants to deliver the ordinances. To do that, he needs a temple. And so the ordinances he will eventually deliver have these, this is where the discussion comes from Freemasonry, because they're related to Masonic ritual. Again, Joseph borrows from everything around him. And his claim is going to be that Masonry is a fractured remnant of the true temple ritual that he's restoring. And that's the central dialogue he always produces. Yeah.
Are these keys visible?
No. It's just this is it's an ordination, right? So if I was ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood, but if I became an elders quorum president, they would put hands on my head and ordain me to that office in the priesthood, or that calling within the priesthood, and then I would have keys to preside over an elders quorum and authorize them to perform ordinances.
So these keys are like you would have the authorization.
Yes. So this is what makes somebody a bishop or a diocese equivalent stake president, or a local priest's quorum president, or an elders quorum president. Each of the presidents of these different quorums that the church forms in this hierarchical structure hold keys to preside over that quorum and authorize ordinance use within the quorum they preside over. And then they get keys from the ones above them, and those keys trickle down. And so it's a very hierarchical, almost Catholic sort of structure. And remember, there's this Peter, James, and John story about Jesus giving them the keys of the kingdom. And this is the keys as Joseph. So in Kirtland, we've got the keys. Now he wants to build the temple and actually do the thing. And it's not clear how far his theology of the temple has evolved until he actually builds one in Nauvoo, which is where he'll actually get the next one built. So now they're still in Missouri, and they've been kicked out of Jackson County, and Sidney Rigdon had problems. This man was, with Joseph Smith, tarred and feathered. So there was a rumor that Joseph had been having inappropriate sexual relations with the Johnson's daughter, I think. That's the way the story goes. I have no idea if they're accurate or not. Joseph was practicing, I think, polygamy by this point. So if he had performed a marriage or something, it's entirely possible. I don't know. Maybe he was doing stuff without that. Maybe he was just sleeping around. I don't know what he was doing, but he was staying there with Emma and his kids in their home, and there's this rumor about this inappropriate sexual relations. And so a mob comes, drags him out, and they're going to castrate him. And they're holding him down naked, and the doctor says, I just can't bring myself to do this. To castrate animals, but he can't bring himself to castrate Joseph. And so instead they tar and feather him and Sidney Rigdon. And Sidney's emotionally scarred from that moment on. I'm not sure he was all there. And he's also angry. But he's also one of Joseph's counselors in the first presidency by this point. And he gets to, they've been kicked out of Kirtland, they've been kicked out of Jackson County, Missouri, and now they're burning farms around their new home in Caldwell County. And Sidney Rigdon gives the Salt Sermon, where he says, "We take God and all the holy angels to witness this day, that we will warn all men in the name of Jesus Christ to come on us no more forever. From this hour we will bear it no more. Our rights shall no more be trampled on with impunity. The man or the set of men who attempts it does it at the expense of their lives. And that mob that comes on us to disturb us, it shall between us and them a war of extermination, for we will follow them till the last drop of their blood is spilled, or else they will have to exterminate us, for we will carry the seat of war to their own homes and their families, and one party or the other shall be utterly destroyed. Remember it, then all men." And it goes on. It just doesn't get much better. It just keeps going. I think it's important to notice that I don't believe that evil is usually committed by people who are out to commit evil. Evil is usually committed by people who think they've been wronged, and they're responding. And what happens is you get both sides responding to what they consider the wrongs of the other, and the result is evil done by both sides, not because of this is just what usually happens. I mean, there's some people who are just sadistic or something. For the most part, this is what happens. After the Salt Sermon, Wilburn W. Boggs, who is the governor of Missouri, issues what's known as the extermination order. You'll notice who said the word extermination first. The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary for the public peace. Their outrages are beyond all description. If you can increase your force, you're authorized to do so and to extend to any extent you may consider necessary. You notice that verbiage shows up in our political discourse about use any and all necessary force to accomplish certain objectives. And now we've got two groups of people bent on exterminating each other in their own verbiage. This leads to what's actually known as the Missouri-Utah War. And at one point, in kind of the peak of this whole mess, was the Hans Mill Massacre. A group of Missourians surrounded. This is the one the Mormons at least remember most, because it feeds their persecution discourse and story. But a bunch of Missourians encircled a mill and massacred a bunch of men, women, children. Most of the women escaped, but there were children, and I think there was at least one woman, and they killed them all some of them after they surrendered, and they just continued to shoot them to a bloody pulp. And one little boy survived under the pile of bodies, and his hip was shot out. There's this Mormon healing story where his mother healed his hip, and it grows back, and he was able to walk later. And he would always tell the story of Hans Mill as the one survivor. This is the kind of bloody massacre that results. And at this point, the Mormons, Joseph Smith and the leaders of the church surrender to the militia, the Missouri militia, and they are charged with some of the Mormon responses, farms burned, people killed, that the Mormons had perpetrated, and were dragged off to a jail in Missouri. And the Mormons, under the leadership, I believe, of Brigham Young, because Sidney Rigdon was also put in jail. So Brigham Young, as the leader of the 12 Apostles, took the church under wing and went looking for a new home. And a bunch of people in Nauvoo, Illinois, offered them haven as refugees. And they said, if you're refugees, we'll give you a place to stay. And they felt horrible about how they'd been treated in Missouri, and they offered them a home in Illinois. So here's the jail where Joseph was kept. If you go there today, there's an entire visitor center built around it, and you've got these mannequins of the people inside just to show you how tall they were, because they couldn't stand up straight in the place where they were kept, and they want to make sure you remember that fact. So they got a mannequin of Joseph, standing trying to stand in the in the cramped jail. At some point, Joseph is allowed to escape, and Joseph and the leaders of the church head back to Nauvoo, Illinois, where Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young are by this point, and Joseph starts over building his new Zion. And they will tell this story over and over and over again. This is the Zion was stolen from us by our enemies after we had legally purchased the land. It was taken from us illegally, and Joseph would actually address the President of the United States for redress. He said, "This is our land. Give it back to us." And he was famously told, "Your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you." So now we're here in Nauvoo, Illinois, where the people of Illinois very kindly took them in as refugees, and they built a city immediately. I mean, that's what Mormons do. You end up kicked out somewhere, so you build a city. So they built Nauvoo, Illinois. Very quickly, at its height, its population was as large as Quincy or Springfield. Although it remained smaller than contemporary Chicago, the only reason people point that out is because Mormons like to say it was bigger than Chicago, and it wasn't. But it was close, and that was close enough that you can even compare them as a big deal. And out of nowhere, I mean, Joseph at this point, sent the 12 off on missions to Europe, and they came back with thousands of converts. Converts were flooding, and the city went from nothing to one of the biggest cities in Illinois overnight. And at this point, the people who'd given them asylum were like, refugees, I wonder if we shouldn't have let all these refugees in. This has modern parallels, doesn't it? Go ahead.
What year are we up to?
1841. 1841 at this point. 1840, maybe.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly when Nauvoo starts.
About a decade since
Mm-hmm.
the church founding in New York.
Yep, the church was founded in New York in 1830, and we're in Missouri, or in Illinois by 1841.
So they've been through a lot in
Yeah.
years.
Kicked from place to place, lost their money in a banking failure, had half of the church apostatize, including one of its leaders, some of whom came back, by the way. Orson Hyde is one of my favorites. In Missouri, he apostatized in Missouri. He was one of the quorum of the 12 apostles, and he left the church. And at one point, he tells the story of sitting with another one of the 12 who had apostatized with him, where an angel appeared to him. He said, what just happened? I saw the light but didn't know what's happened. And the other one turned to him and said, an angel just appeared to me and said I needed to go back to Joseph or I'd be a son of perdition. I know too much and I can't. And then he didn't go back. But apparently it spooked Orson, so Orson went back. And so he went back and rejoined the church and apologized. And later when he died, he had this disease that was causing him all sorts of pain. He was bloated and very large man by this point. He was kind of writhing in agony. And people came to him and said, what can we do to ease your pain? You clearly don't, you're in distress. And he says, oh, it's not that. He says, I just feel horrible. There was ever a moment in my life when I wasn't loyal to the prophet Joseph Smith. So this is one of those. And again, he left the church. He came back. But anyway, the church had been through an awful lot, and it fueled their persecution narrative.
Can you just define apostatize?
Oh, in his language, it meant he decided the church wasn't true, and he'd left. He actually claimed that Joseph was a fallen prophet or something. I think was his claim, because of the stuff that was happening in Missouri. He felt like Joseph was inciting some of the violence, I think. But in Joseph's eyes, he was defending the church and his people against violence, and they were both. This is what happens. People defend themselves against other people who are defending themselves, and pretty soon everyone's killing each other when all they want is to be left alone. All right, Nauvoo, Illinois. This is the Nauvoo Temple, and immediately when you get to Nauvoo, we start building another temple. Joseph Smith will die before this temple is completed. He's always said that he can't give the ordinances before the temple is completed. He's got a set of ordinances he says he wants to convey. At this point, Joseph joins the Freemasons. And this is part of, again, the discussion that rages around what happens next, because he joins the Freemasons, and then at some point he stands up and says, we can't wait. The Lord is pushing me. Joseph seems to have almost a real premonition at this point. He says, the Lord is pushing me. I feel like I have to get this done. And so he owned a red brick storehouse in Nauvoo, Illinois, and he went to the upper room of the red brick storehouse, dedicated as a temporary temple. And again, the Revelation said it couldn't happen until the temple was built. Well, they built a Masonic hall called the temple. And Joseph then went to the upper room of the red brick store and said, we're not going to wait for Nauvoo. The Nauvoo temple isn't finished, but we're going to do this now. The temple has been, a temple has been built. Apparently he's counting the Nauvoo temple, or the Masonic hall as a sufficient fulfillment of the prophecy, and he gives the ordinances of the temple, what we now consider the ordinances of the Mormon temple, which again is next class, to a select group of people, including Brigham Young, the entire quorum of the 12 apostles. And he leaves some of his first counselors out. It's going to be an important point in a little bit. He just doesn't trust them by this point. In fact, he instigates an excommunication trial for Sidney Rigdon, who was his first counselor. And I don't remember why. I can't even remember why now. And the Quorum of the 12 voted not to do it. And Joseph says, essentially, I have tried to throw him off. You haven't been willing, or something like this, and so one day he will be on your shoulders, not mine. Again, this is one of those prophetic moments in Joseph's life. And this is the Nauvoo Temple today. It was destroyed by a tornado, and I think an earthquake finally knocked the rest of it down. And just a few years ago, the church rebuilt it. This is one of those old church temples where they owned the plot of land and they built it. So the Nauvoo Temple was rebuilt by the church. It looks, from the outside, it's almost identical. The inside is completely different than the way Joseph did it, set up for modern temple ordinances where the other one wasn't. But the outside is designed to be identical to the way Joseph designed it. You'll notice Joseph makes this thing. I mean, they have faced it with stone, but Joseph made it out of solid stone blocks when Joseph built this thing. So it's quite the architectural feat. Nauvoo is when polygamy really hits. There's a series of things that happen in Nauvoo. Joseph begins teaching polygamy, not just doing it himself, but teaching it to his closest followers. The Quorum of the 12 all enter into polygamy. At this point, William Law is one of his counselors, and Sidney Rigdon is his other counselor, I believe. There was a time when Bennett was, and then he was kicked out. I'm trying to remember how this worked. And William Law is one of those interesting characters who Mormons malign, and I kind of consider a hero now. And I feel bad for the bad things I've said about him in the past. But William Law is approached by Joseph with polygamy. And how that happened depends on who you listen to. So I'm not going to try to pick a side or tell the details because I'll probably get them wrong. But essentially, William Law says, no, this is wrong. Polygamy is wrong. I'm not going to be part of this. And he begged Joseph not to do it. And he says, if you don't do this, this will be the greatest church in the history of the world. If you do this, it will ruin the church. And Joseph says, I can't. It's a commandment from God. This isn't my choice. This is what we must do. And there was a whole theology behind it that was connected to earlier theology, which we'll cover again when we cover the theology. It's not just out of the blue. And William Box. And for a while he'll do the whole Joseph is a fallen prophet, and then he'll just disavow Mormonism. When he does the whole Joseph is a fallen prophet, he publishes a newspaper because he's not going to just leave. He believes that Joseph is leading the church away. And he was one of the first counselors in the first presidency. So he is almost kind of the second in charge. If Joseph is ousted, this is him. Right? This is why the Mormons claim he's seeking for power and stuff. But he publishes a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor, where he claims that Joseph is practicing polygamy. And this is not public knowledge. So he outs Joseph's polygamy in the Nauvoo Expositor. He claims that Joseph was anointed by a quorum of people that Joseph set up to be a political body called the Council of 50, and that Joseph was anointed not just to be, so part of the temple ordinance is to anoint people a king and a priest to the Most High God, to rule and reign hereafter in the house of Israel forever. That is part of the theosis theology of Mormonism. But Joseph wasn't just anointed to be that. He was anointed to be king of this world, the vicar kind of Christ, to literally rule and reign on this earth until Christ comes. They're setting up a theocracy. And in the U.S., that's treason. To make yourself a king and to call yourself a king is treason. And Joseph is claiming, he's the rightful king of the world. At this point, he runs for U.S. president. It's almost like he oversteps at this point and starts having delusions of grandeur. He runs for president. He's anointed king of the world. He's not just practicing polygamy, but taking wives like crazy. Some of them, there's some people married to other people. It's almost like he's practicing polyamory. Which, by the way, wouldn't be so bad. I have polyamorous friends, except the Mormon version of polyamory is incredibly sexist. A man can have more than one wife, but a wife can't necessarily have more than one husband. And yet, once in a while, Joseph would marry someone else's wife, and no clue how that works. And it was a mess. And he ticked off a lot of people. And William Law was one of them. And William Law started exposing his behavior. At this point, Joseph Smith was actually the mayor of Nauvoo, literally the mayor. And he called the city council together and said, we have laws against public nuisances. This newspaper is committing libel against me. And they charged them with libel, charged them with a public nuisance, and the whole council ordered the destruction of the newspaper. Again, if there's one thing Americans love, it's freedom of the press. And Joseph just destroyed a newspaper. More importantly today, if you go through the Nauvoo Expositor, I have yet to find a single falsehood printed in it anywhere. 99% of it looked like a falsehood at the time, but we now have the journals, and the things he is accusing Joseph of, including the being anointed king, happened. We know that. And so they actually told the truth, and the newspaper was destroyed for telling the truth under the pretext of them being a libelous newspaper. And this is what gets Joseph killed. So you can almost say that polygamy killed Joseph, but certainly the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor did. So the Missourians still have an arrest warrant for Joseph. Some guards let him go, but they want him back. So they're trying to extradite Joseph to Missouri so they can try him for treason and hang him for the murders that happened in Missouri, when actually people were being killed on both sides. That's not quite accurate. But now Illinois issues a warrant for his arrest, this time for the destruction of property. And Joseph skips out, and he heads towards Utah. And he says, we're going to just leave the United States. Because at this point, Utah wasn't part of the United States. He says, we're going to leave the United States. We're going to go somewhere where they would just leave us the heck alone. And that's his approach. And we'll just go to Utah where we can practice polygamy and do whatever we want, and people will leave us alone. And he starts heading there. And some people back in Nauvoo came and said, why are you abandoning us, Joseph? He says, I'm not abandoning you. I'm going to find a place where we can be left alone. You're coming after me. And they said, no, Joseph, you can't leave us like this. And so there was this discussion where Joseph was begged to return, and he says, if I go back, they'll kill me. And they said, yeah, maybe, And Joseph says, well, let it never be said that I'm not willing to risk death for my friends. And he goes back. Now at this point, he's given the temple ordinances that he wanted to give. He walked into the Masonic Hall at one point and strode up and down the hall in the middle of an initiation. He broke up and shouting, hallelujah, I've done it. I've revealed everything the Lord asked me to reveal. If they kill me now, the church will go on without me, because I've given you everything you need. You can now bear up the kingdom and carry it on your shoulders, and I'm going to rest. That's kind of what he said. So there's this sense almost that at this point Joseph is kind of willingly marching to his death, because I think he has some intuition of what's coming, and you don't have to be a prophet to know what's coming, but he has some intuition. There are people who want him dead, and they're pretty serious about it. And he goes back willingly instead of going to Utah, and he surrenders, and they take him to this place called Carthage Jail. Governor Ford is the governor of Illinois, promises Joseph safety and his protection, and he puts the Carthage Greys in charge of Joseph's security, and they appear to load their guns with blanks, and when the mob comes to kill him, they fire their blanks in the air and then walk away and stand aside. Joseph has a pistol with him, and so does a few of the other people who are with him, and so when the mob storms the jail, he fires the pistol back, and there's some discussion about whether they actually killed one of the mob or not in the firefight that ensued. There's also a discussion about whether Joseph can actually be a martyr if he fought back. Kind of my feeling is you're a martyr for your faith. If people kill you for your faith, you don't have to say, please kill me. but there was a gunfight that ensued, and Hiram Smith, Joseph's brother, was shot first in the face, and Joseph is described as crying out and cuddling his brother in his arms after he's unloaded his pistol. Willard Richards and John Taylor are busy fighting the people off at the door and trying to block the door, and then they would push it open and they would take their canes and try to knock the guns down. And at this point, Joseph Smith decides he's got to get out. John Taylor is shot, Hiram is dead, and Joseph jumps for the window, and there's a whole bunch of people outside who see him coming towards the window, and he's shot from outside and from inside, we think, at the same time, and he fell from the window. He also raised his hands and cried, "Oh Lord my God," and that's the first line of the Masonic cry of distress. The implication is he's trying to give the rest of it, and he dies, and he's calling for help from the Masons. At this point, Joseph Smith is a master Mason in good standing. The mob coming to kill him is made up almost entirely of Masons who are mad at him for the way he ran the Nauvoo Lodge and for the way and of course for the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor and for a whole host of reasons. But there's some, I think, reasonable discussion about whether they broke their Masonic covenants when they killed a Mason still in reasonably good standing in the midst of the cry of distress. That's saving him.
Is it hierarchically decided if he's in good standing because they didn't like?
Yeah, they didn't. In fact, there was a whole.
I don't know what it means for him to be in good standing.
There's a whole fallout happening in Nauvoo because Joseph sends all of his church leaders to the Masonic Hall and gets them raised third-degree Masons, and he does that because he's using the Masonic Hall as a temple prep class before endowing them with his ritual. So remember, he claims his ritual is the restoration of what the Masons have a fragment of the lost. So he gives them the true ritual, but he sends them all to the Masonic Lodge first as a sort of temple prep class. To do that, Joseph essentially controls the votes. I mean, Masons are supposed to vote on who gets accepted, and Joseph, there's irregularities in the minutes of the Nauvoo Lodge because Joseph is busy. The Nauvoo Lodge sends more people through the degrees than anyone else in the country. Overnight, Joseph essentially takes the entire church leadership and throws them through the Masonic Lodge. And he does that by controlling the vote because everyone votes exactly as he wants them to vote. And so Joseph is making enemies everywhere he goes. Anyway, at this point, he's dead. They exhumed his body at one point and reburied him. This is where he's currently buried. And this kicked off the Mormon succession crisis. And the reason it's a crisis is because there's some evidence that Joseph wanted his son, Joseph Smith III, to succeed him. But Joseph Smith III is a child when Joseph dies. Sidney Rigdon pops up and says, "There can be no prophet after Joseph, but I will be the church's guardian and custodian because I'm in the first presidency." William Law, of course, was in the first presidency, but William Law has been excommunicated. Hiram was also in the church's leading government and possibly should have succeeded Joseph doctrinally until his son grew up or whatever. Hiram, his brother, has been murdered. We lost Joseph and Hiram at the same time. And so it's not clear who's supposed to be in charge. Joseph actually had a succession structure sort of in place, and it just didn't work because Sidney Rigdon was kind of off in Never Never Land, and Hiram was killed at the same time as Joseph, and Joseph Smith III was too young, and it kind of all got messed up. And so this is Joseph Smith III. This is Emma, Joseph's wife. Joseph's wife hates Brigham Young, hates him. Brigham is wedded to the idea of polygamy, very literally. Emma hates polygamy, and for obvious reasons, I think. And Sidney Rigdon, I don't think, really even knew about it. I think. And it's not, well, no, that's not true because there was a proposition of his wife. I think he knew about it, but I don't think he was terribly enamored of the idea himself either. And so what really started to happen was a debate between the polygamists and the non-polygamists. And part of the problem is that polygamy was secret. So you only realize after the fact that this is a debate between the polygamists and the non-polygamists. After you get to Utah, polygamy is made available, and then we start looking at who was involved in polygamy and who wasn't. You start seeing where the lines of disagreement came down. The other thing that was happening had to do with the temple ordinances. Joseph had created what he calls the Holy Order, and these are the people who were given the temple ordinances before he left Nauvoo. Those temple ordinances were wound up with polygamy. So the people who got the temple ordinances were the same people who practiced polygamy. But the people who got the temple ordinances also understood certain things about priesthood authority, which we'll talk about later, that made them think differently about the succession crisis. And almost without exception, they followed Brigham Young, Emma being one of the few exceptions. So everyone that Joseph had taught the higher ordinances to at the temple followed Brigham. And they were also the polygamists. Emma has, you almost get the impression that Emma just lost her husband to this whole church thing and doesn't want to lose her son. And so she doesn't really push Joseph Smith III's claim on the leadership. He's too young anyway. And she just kind of wants nothing to do with the church at this point. She'll later remarry, and then later, many years later, she'll put forward Joseph Smith III as the leadership of a new, what they call the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo. And then they will go to Missouri, and that's where their church headquarters is. You went to Missouri, you saw those buildings. And the temple. That's the church she and her son found, and they're now called the Community of Christ, and they are centered in Missouri, where Joseph wanted the church to be centered. Brigham Young took the vast majority of the Latter-day Saints and headed off to Salt Lake City, Utah, which is where Joseph wanted to go. This was Joseph's plan from the beginning. So Brigham goes where Joseph was headed. And Brigham is a organizer par excellence. He's not a visionary like Joseph. He doesn't, spin doctrine quite as much. He's got his own little quirks. We can talk about his theory that Adam is actually God and all sorts of fun, bizarre Brigham Young-ish things that the later church just all kind of shook their head at and said, Brigham, why did you say that? And ignored it. As soon as he's dead, it's like, let's forget everything he said. But he was really good at organizing people and moving them. So when they were kicked out of Nauvoo, they crossed the river in the froze. It froze just in time for them to all cross to escape Nauvoo. There was actually cannons being shot into Nauvoo and all sorts of. They were serious about kicking them out at this point. And they went here to winter quarters, what's called winter quarters, and there many, many, many people died of. They froze to death. They were trying to build log cabins in the winter to stay warm, because they were kicked out in the middle of the winter. They abandoned the temple. It was finished after Joseph died. They finished it, and Brigham Young gave the temple ordinances that Joseph had given to him and the 12 to everybody. And then they left. They just abandoned. They used the temple and abandoned it. And so it was amazing. They worked to finish it so they could use it, knowing they were going to leave it. And then they did. And they stayed there for the winter, and then Brigham Young sent them in various troops to Utah, where he established Salt Lake City, became the first governor of Salt Lake City, and settled the vast majority of the West. From all the way down to Las Vegas, down into Mexico, up into Idaho. He established most of those settlements, leading the Mormons to build this new, what he called Deseret, which is a phrase from the Book of Mormon having to do with industry and people living industriously. The other part, I guess I forgot to mention, completely spaced, but the Mormons tended to practice a communal sort of living. It's not quite communism because it's not forced. It's which is something modern Mormons make a big deal about. It's because communism is I come to you and I steal all of your stuff and redistribute it, and what they call the United Order was you come to me and give all of your stuff willingly and we distribute it. So, but it was a communistic sort of socialistic system where everybody shared. They had a shared economy, and Brigham Young ran that shared economy in Utah for the first few years at least to make it all work. Otherwise, you just couldn't do some of the things he did in Utah to give everybody a home, to give everybody a place, to settle the West, and to make everybody work together in kind of a communal setting. And then of course, some people started making more money than others and started complaining about the freeloaders, and the same problems you have with these sorts of systems began to crop up, and it fell apart. And the United Order was stopped, even by Brigham Young. But when he stopped it, he kind of said, this is why we haven't redeemed Zion yet. And Brigham Young still wants to go back to Missouri, right? Missouri is the Garden of Eden. Missouri is where we're going to build our temple. And there were prophecies that it would happen. And then he said, well, yeah, but you're not willing to live the law. In fact, the final covenant you make in the Mormon temple is to obey the law of consecration, which is you give all that you have to build Zion. Everything you have belongs to God, and you give it all to him, and he gives it all back to you and makes a God out of you. That's the deal. And you give everything. And he said, as a culture and society, we are unwilling to live the law of consecration, which is we give all of our time, talents to the church, and then it's redistributed and we're shared equally. And that's why God isn't letting us rebuild Zion. And he says, as soon as we're willing to live the law of consecration as a people, we'll go back to Jackson County, Missouri, we'll build the temple, and Christ will come. And it's our fault it's not happening. And Mormons still have this guilt. We're not living the law of consecration because we just can't seem to get ourselves unselfish enough. You see? Yeah.
How long did this, the law of consecration?
Joseph starts it in Kirtland, Ohio. It happens in Missouri, and that's part of the challenges with the neighbors, among other things. And not only do they vote as a block, they share all their goods in common. And Brigham Young has it going for several years in Utah. I think it only lasts a couple of years. But then there's a town called Orderville in Utah. There's a couple towns that continued living the law of consecration for years as small local communities. But you imagine that makes it really hard for a non-Mormon to move into Utah. You're not a member of the church, right? Everyone else shares all their stuff in common, and you don't. Let's see. So this is the Mormon pioneer heritage that we always talk about. We're the sons of pioneers, and this is part of their culture. Not only is it a persecution narrative, now we have this brave, people braving the weather and burying their children along the way so they could come to Zion. And they made it to Salt Lake City, and now we need to be grateful for their sacrifice because we're the beneficiaries of what they gave us, is the way the story will go. For generations to come, this is still the story that's told, especially in Salt Lake City. And of course, you can imagine what Brigham Young does the moment he gets to Salt Lake City. He lays the cornerstone for a temple, which takes them 40 years to build, by the way. And this is the Salt Lake Temple, which is, I think, the most impressive physical structure the Mormons built. It's really impressive. And so next class we'll do Mormon theology. We can talk about things like polygamy. We can talk about things like why they didn't give black people the priesthood, which we already covered a little bit before class. We can talk about things like women and why women aren't ordained and why they're opposed to gay marriage and how that theologically fits. And then we can talk about the kind of rituals that they use in these temples. And I want to do that with a certain amount of respect because most Mormons won't even talk about them, consider them so sacred. But I think we can. The whole point of this class was to discuss rituals that other people do, because in that we see a human need that is fulfilled. Those rituals are moving for people because they accurately fulfill some sort of human need. And so I think we have to be able to discuss this. But I think we can do it respectfully, but we want to discuss what that psychological need is and how that ritual fits with other rituals from around the world and what it means to a Mormon to participate in those sorts of rituals. And so we'll go through the temples, we'll show you pictures of the insides, we'll talk about what they do there, and we'll go over some of the symbolism in the architecture. Because they very intentionally put some fairly profound symbolism into the architecture when they built them. So it should be really fun. So we'll have the doctrine, we'll have the politics, and we'll have the temple building and the rituals. Next class, December 18th, I think, is the Friday, third Friday, the Friday before Christmas. So, any last questions before we quit? We'll quit 5 minutes early this time. We didn't have a break though, so.
Yeah.
Any last questions? No? Okay, thank you.